The plane was cruising smoothly through the clear blue sky, passengers chatting quietly, some dozing off, others peering out of the small oval windows at the clouds below. Flight attendants moved gracefully through the aisles, offering drinks, snacks, and warm smiles. Among them was a young woman in a crisp uniform, her hair tied neatly, a calm smile on her face. To everyone watching, she seemed like any other flight attendant, polite, professional, and composed. But beneath that composed exterior was a story no one could imagine. She wasn't just trained in hospitality or safety protocols. She had a past that was far more dangerous than the calm interior of a commercial airplane suggested. She had spent years in the military as a combat pilot. Her life had been defined by missions where precision, courage, and quick thinking were the difference between life and death. Her kill tally, a record of confirmed enemy combatants she had taken down, was something classified, known only to the highest authorities. It was a past she kept hidden, buried under the simple uniform of a flight attendant. Today, she was blending in, pretending to serve coffee and snacks, while her mind stayed alert, scanning the cabin, noticing small details that others would never see. The passengers were unaware of the storm about to strike. Children laughed, couples whispered to each other, and businesspeople typed quietly on their laptops. The hum of the engines and the gentle vibration of the plane against the air created a rhythm that lulled most into a false sense of security. Only she seemed to sense the invisible tension, a subtle feeling that something was different this time. It wasn't fear, it was a trained instinct, a gut feeling honed over years of high-stakes missions. She moved through the aisle with calm precision, checking that seat belts were fastened, observing passengers without looking suspicious. Every gesture, every smile was part of her disguise. She noticed the crew in the cockpit, going through their routine checks, completely unaware of the danger looming ahead. They were focused on the instruments, unaware of the world beyond the cockpit door. She, on the other hand, mentally prepared for every possible scenario. Hijackings were rare, but in her line of life before this, nothing was truly impossible. She remembered her missions, the countless hours spent analyzing enemy movements, predicting threats, and acting with deadly accuracy. Now, all that training felt distant, yet she knew it could be needed at any moment. Passengers occasionally glanced at her, some smiling politely, others nodding as she passed by. None could guess that the calm woman serving them tea and coffee could one day become the key to saving all their lives. She had learned long ago that appearances could deceive, that ordinary exteriors could hide extraordinary skills. Today, she was the perfect disguise, a guardian in plain sight. As the flight continued, the sun cast a warm golden glow through the windows, and everything seemed normal. Conversations carried on. The clinking of cups and the rustle of newspapers filled the cabin. Yet she remained vigilant. Her eyes subtly scanned for anything unusual. A nervous passenger shifting in their seat, a hand lingering too long in a bag, the slightest sign of tension or unease. Her senses were tuned to detect even the faintest hint of danger. A skill developed from years of being hunted, trained to survive, and trained to act when others could not. She also quietly observed her fellow flight attendants. They were all focused on their duties, unaware of the hidden threat. Some smiled nervously at passengers, others checked the emergency equipment, and a few whispered jokes to ease the monotony of the long flight. She kept to herself, friendly but distant, always aware that one sudden action could change the course of the day. Her calm demeanor wasn't just professional, it was a shield. She was ready to react, ready to protect, ready to fight if the unimaginable happened. As the plane sailed higher, the tranquility of the cabin created a sharp contrast with the life she had once led. Combat zones, missions under enemy fire, life or death decisions, these were her past. But now, in this quiet, seemingly ordinary airplane cabin, all that experience lay dormant, waiting for the moment it would be called into action. She carried herself with the ease of someone who had seen far worse but had learned that preparation, patience, and vigilance were the keys to survival. Everything seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful. The laughter, the conversations, the gentle hum of the plane. All of it felt fragile, like a thin glass waiting to shatter. and she knew it. Something about this flight, something in the subtle energy of the passengers, told her that soon, the calm would be broken. But until that moment, she moved gracefully, serving, smiling, observing, all the while ready for the storm that she alone could confront. No one suspected that behind that composed smile and the polite gestures of a flight attendant was a woman who had faced far greater dangers than anyone in this cabin could imagine. She was a trained killer, a disciplined soldier, and a protector in disguise. And though the passengers thought this was just another ordinary flight, she knew that nothing about this day would be ordinary, and that the events ahead would reveal her true self in a way no one would ever forget. The routine of the flight continued peacefully for a while, passengers chatting quietly or looking out of the small windows at the endless blue sky. Flight attendants moved down the aisles, checking on passengers and making sure everyone was comfortable. But then, in a moment so sudden it seemed unreal, chaos erupted. The calm hum of the plane was shattered by the harsh sound of a door opening and the arrival of armed men. The passengers froze, their laughter and conversation replaced by confusion and fear. The hijackers moved quickly and confidently, their faces hardened and voices demanding immediate obedience. They were dressed in ordinary clothes, blending in just enough to get close before revealing the weapons hidden beneath their jackets. The passengers could only stare in shock as the hijackers shouted orders, waving guns and threatening anyone who moved too quickly. The once comfortable cabin now felt like a cage, and the air was thick with panic. Children cried, couples clutched each other, and the older passengers looked around helplessly, unsure what to do. Among all this fear, the flight attendant who had been quietly moving through the cabin suddenly became the center of her own hidden mission. To everyone else, she seemed calm, still smiling politely, still nodding as passengers obeyed the hijackers' orders. But inside, her mind was racing. Years of combat training kicked in instantly. She analyzed the situation like a chessboard, noting the number of hijackers, their positions, the location of passengers, and every potential weakness in the plan the hijackers were trying to force on them. She did not panic because panic was never an option. She had been in situations before where hesitation meant death, and she knew this situation required precise thinking and immediate action. She noticed small details that no one else could see. One hijacker was glancing nervously at the passengers near the front of the plane, while another was distracted by a spilled drink on the floor. The third kept shifting his weight, signaling impatience. These small signs told her more than words ever could. Fear was present even in those trying to terrify others. She used these observations to create a mental map, planning how to subtly control each threat without putting the passengers at further risk. Her eyes briefly met those of a frightened passenger. She gave a calm, reassuring smile. A simple gesture, but it had a purpose. It sent a silent message: "Stay calm. I'm in control." That small act of courage was enough to ease some of the panic around her, even if just for a moment. While the passengers were frozen in fear, she was thinking 2 steps ahead, calculating how to protect everyone while preparing to confront the hijackers if necessary. In the cockpit, the pilots were locked inside, aware that something was wrong but unsure of the severity. The hijackers' presence was causing stress, but they had no way to act without endangering the passengers. Outside the cockpit, the cabin had turned into a tense battlefield. But this flight attendant, with her hidden combat experience, was mentally ready for the chaos. She had faced life and death situations before, and she understood that fear could be an enemy, clouding judgment and slowing action. Her calm was her weapon. As the hijackers moved through the cabin, making demands and threatening violence, the passengers tried to obey, hoping to survive. But the flight attendant's mind was working silently, like a well-oiled machine. She thought about escape routes, ways to separate the hijackers, and strategies to use the environment of the plane to her advantage. Every aisle, every seat, every overhead compartment became part of her mental plan. She was preparing to act, to protect, and, if necessary, to neutralize the threat. The hijackers, confident and arrogant, had no idea they were dealing with someone far more dangerous than any passenger or crew member they had expected. They believed they had full control. They didn't notice the calm eyes of the flight attendant tracking their every move, measuring timing, and anticipating reactions. They didn't know that behind her polite exterior was a woman who had trained for years to face enemies, survive deadly encounters, and come out alive when others could not. Despite the fear in the cabin, she moved gracefully and deliberately, always positioning herself where she could act quickly if needed. She didn't panic. She didn't shout. She didn't make any sudden movements that might alert the hijackers to her real skills. Every step, every glance, every gesture was carefully calculated. She was blending in, staying under the radar, while secretly preparing to take control of the situation. Passengers were tense, gripping armrests and whispering prayers. Children clung to their parents, their eyes wide in confusion and fear. Every second felt like an eternity as the hijackers barked orders and moved down the aisles. But the flight attendant remained focused, observing everything, readying herself for the moment when action would be unavoidable. In that moment of absolute tension, the ordinary-looking flight attendant became extraordinary. She was a silent guardian, hiding in plain sight, ready to turn fear into control, chaos into order. The plane, once a simple vessel for travel, had become a stage for bravery, for quick thinking, and for hidden heroism. The passengers had no idea that their survival might depend on the calm, collected, and highly trained woman serving them tea just moments ago. And in that split second before the first move could be made, she took a deep breath, centering herself. She knew the next moments would be critical, that every decision could save lives or cost them. She had faced impossible odds before, and now, in the confined cabin of a commercial airplane, her past and present were about to collide in a way no one would ever forget. As the hijackers shouted orders and demanded control of the plane, the flight attendant's calm demeanor never wavered. While everyone else was frozen in fear, she quietly shifted into a mode of complete focus. Years of military training had taught her that panic could destroy even the best-laid plans. She understood that in moments like this, survival depended on precision, patience, and the ability to act decisively. Her body was calm, but her mind was racing, mapping out every possible move the hijackers could make, and how she could respond. Every detail of the cabin was now important. She observed the positions of the hijackers, noting which one was closest to the passengers, which was guarding the aisle, and which seemed the most nervous. Even small things, the tilt of a head, the grip on a gun, the speed of a step, gave her information about their state of mind. Her military instincts, honed in countless missions, allowed her to read them like an open book. She was not just a flight attendant anymore. She was a strategist, a soldier in disguise, and a protector of everyone on board. She quietly moved down the aisle under the pretense of checking on passengers. Every smile, every polite word, was part of her strategy to keep fear at bay. Passengers thought she was trying to calm them, but in reality, she was also creating small distractions, observing the hijackers' reactions to subtle movements, and testing their attention. Her mind was running hundreds of calculations at once, each one predicting what might happen if she moved here, if she said something there, or if she distracted a hijacker for just a second. As she worked silently, she also tried to communicate discreetly with the cockpit. Using coded signals and gestures, she made sure the pilots were aware of what was happening and ready to act when the opportunity came. She knew that control of the cockpit was crucial. If the hijackers reached the pilots, the situation could turn deadly very quickly. But she also knew that rushing in recklessly could put everyone at risk. She had to be precise, patient, and completely strategic, just as she had been trained for years ago in combat zones. The passengers began to notice that something about her was different. Her calmness in the face of danger seemed almost unnatural. Children looked at her with curiosity rather than fear, and some adults felt a strange sense of reassurance when she moved past them. Little did they know, this was no ordinary calm. It was a trained instinct, a deep well of focus that allowed her to see everything clearly even under immense pressure. She was already thinking several steps ahead, predicting how the hijackers would respond to any sudden movement. Her training also reminded her to control her breathing and her emotions. In high-pressure situations, adrenaline could cloud judgment, but she had learned to turn adrenaline into clarity. Her heart beat steadily, her hands remained steady, and her eyes scanned constantly. She was fully present in every moment, aware of the threats around her, and ready to react with precision. Every sound, the clatter of a dropped bag, the shuffle of feet, the murmured voices of frightened passengers, was catalogued in her mind as potential information she could use to gain an advantage. She began to prepare for possible physical action. She considered the best ways to approach each hijacker without alarming them, how to use objects in the cabin as tools or barriers if needed, and how to position herself to protect the most vulnerable passengers. She knew she couldn't rely on brute strength alone. This required strategy, timing, and intelligence. Her past missions had trained her for situations where every move had to be calculated, where hesitation could mean failure or death. Now, those lessons were about to become crucial. While the hijackers barked commands, she noticed cracks in their confidence. One looked frustrated at a passenger who didn't obey quickly enough. Another glanced nervously at the overhead compartments. These small signs were like openings in a fortress wall, giving her chances to act. She didn't rush, didn't show any outward aggression, but she mentally prepared to exploit every tiny weakness. Her mind was working faster than anyone could see, creating a plan in real time to regain control of the cabin without endangering innocent lives. She also thought about the passengers. Mothers holding children, elderly couples, and frightened young adults. They were relying on her without even knowing it. Their survival depended on her ability to stay calm, think clearly, and act decisively. She felt the weight of that responsibility but did not let it overwhelm her. Instead, it sharpened her focus, making her more determined to see the situation through successfully. As the minutes passed, the tension in the cabin increased. The hijackers shouted louder, their movements becoming more aggressive as they tried to assert control. But the flight attendant remained a picture of composure. She was ready to move when the moment was right, ready to protect, and ready to fight if necessary. She knew that the first move had to be perfect, calculated, and decisive. One wrong step could turn a controlled situation into a tragedy. And in that moment, she was no longer just a flight attendant serving passengers. She was a guardian, a strategist, a soldier in disguise. Her years of combat experience, her confirmed kill tally, and her instinctive ability to stay calm under pressure had all led to this point. Everyone on the plane had no idea that their safety depended on the quick thinking and bravery of the woman moving quietly among them, hiding in plain sight, preparing to confront the hijackers and save countless lives. The situation in the cabin had reached a breaking point. The hijackers, confident and aggressive, believed they had full control of the plane. Passengers were tense, gripping armrests and whispering prayers, eyes wide with fear. The cabin air felt thick with panic, and every small sound seemed amplified. The click of a seatbelt, a nervous cough, the shuffle of feet. But among all this chaos, the flight attendant remained astonishingly calm. Her mind was sharp, every instinct trained, every thought focused on regaining control without putting anyone in danger. She began her first subtle moves, using distraction and observation. While smiling politely at passengers and offering reassuring words, she noticed how the hijackers responded to small changes. One seemed irritated by a spilled drink on the floor. Another was distracted by a child shifting in a seat. These tiny reactions were openings, tiny weaknesses that she could exploit. She didn't rush. She understood that timing was everything. In her past missions, a single misstep could cost lives. Here, the stakes were no different. She positioned herself strategically in the aisle, keeping herself between the hijackers and the most vulnerable passengers. Her movements were casual, almost ordinary, but every step was calculated. She blocked sight lines, directed attention subtly, and created opportunities to isolate one hijacker from the group. Each gesture, each word, each glance was part of a larger plan that only she could see. While the hijackers thought they were in control, she was quietly manipulating the environment to her advantage. She started communicating with the cockpit crew using subtle cues. A slight tilt of her head, a coded phrase whispered to a nearby flight attendant, signals that only the trained pilots and crew could recognize. This coordination was crucial. The pilots were preparing to assist when the right moment came, but they could not act until she created the opportunity. Her ability to remain undetected while directing the response was remarkable. No one suspected that the calm, polite flight attendant moving down the aisle was actually orchestrating a plan to take down armed hijackers. The passengers remained largely unaware of what was happening behind the scenes. Some glanced nervously at the hijackers, others clutched their seats in terror. A few whispered to each other, wondering why she seemed so unshakable. Little did they know, her composure was not luck. It was years of combat training distilled into perfect calm. She understood human psychology, knowing exactly how fear worked, how it could be used against the hijackers without harming anyone. Her presence alone began to slow the panic spreading among the passengers, giving them a small sense of reassurance even as danger loomed. Her mind raced with possibilities. She imagined different scenarios, calculated the risks, and weighed every action. One miscalculation could turn a controlled situation into disaster. But she was trained for this kind of precision. She had neutralized threats in far more dangerous environments, where hesitation could mean death. Here, she had a confined space and innocent lives to protect. It was a different battlefield, but the rules of strategy remained the same. Stay calm, analyze carefully, and act decisively. She noticed that the hijackers were not fully synchronized. One was aggressive but easily distracted, another overconfident and predictable. These patterns became her advantage. She subtly maneuvered passengers, guiding them to safer positions without drawing attention. She whispered instructions under the guise of checking on comfort, gently moving a nervous mother and her child to a corner of the cabin. She was controlling the environment, isolating threats, and protecting the innocent, all while appearing ordinary. Every move was silent and precise. She created small distractions, like dropping a tray at a calculated moment or bumping into a hijacker accidentally. These actions were designed to make the hijackers react, revealing more about their weaknesses and creating openings for her to act decisively later. While they thought they were in command, they were being studied, tested, and subtly manipulated by someone who had faced far worse challenges in her life. The passengers' fear began to mix with a strange sense of calm, though they didn't know why. Her presence had a stabilizing effect, a silent signal that someone capable was watching over them. Even the most terrified passengers felt a small spark of hope, sensing her confidence without understanding its source. She was the anchor in a sea of chaos, the one person whose awareness and skill could change the outcome of this crisis. She prepared for the next phase, knowing that timing would determine success. She thought about how to separate the hijackers, how to create moments when they were alone or distracted, and how to control their movements without raising suspicion. Every decision was measured, every step deliberate. The environment of the plane, the aisles, the seats, the overhead compartments, was now her tactical advantage. She had turned a cabin full of fear into a carefully controlled battlefield in her mind. As the hijackers moved through the plane, shouting and waving weapons, she stayed perfectly poised. Her calm was not passive. It was active, a strategic weapon. She was ready to strike at the precise moment, ready to protect every passenger, and ready to ensure that the hijackers' confidence would be their downfall. With every passing second, she gained more control over the situation, quietly turning the chaos to her favor, proving that courage, intelligence, and training could turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. In that moment, she was no longer just a flight attendant serving passengers. She was a strategist, a guardian, and a silent warrior. Her ability to manipulate the situation without alarming the hijackers or panicking the passengers set the stage for the next crucial phase, where her skill and bravery would be revealed in a way no one could have imagined. The moment had finally arrived. After carefully observing the hijackers and positioning herself strategically, the flight attendant knew she had to act. Up until now, she had relied on subtlety, observation, and distractions. But she also understood that delaying too long could give the hijackers a chance to gain full control, putting everyone at risk. Her mind, trained for high-pressure situations, calculated the risks with precision. She had to be fast, accurate, and controlled. The first hijacker was the easiest to isolate. He was distracted, watching a nervous passenger too closely, unaware of the subtle movements around him. She moved silently, her steps measured and deliberate, like a predator approaching her target. To any observer, it seemed she was simply passing by, checking on passengers, but every motion was tactical. She positioned herself in a way that blocked his view of the rest of the cabin, creating a small bubble where she had full control. Then, with the calm precision of someone who had trained for years in life-or-death situations, she neutralized him. She didn't shout, she didn't panic, and she didn't give him a chance to react. Her movements were swift and efficient, targeting vulnerabilities she had identified in seconds. It was a controlled action, aimed at stopping him without harming anyone else. The hijacker went down silently, and for a moment, no one realized what had happened. The passengers were still frozen in fear, unaware of the silent battle unfolding among them. Children clung to their parents, older passengers sat rigid with tension, and the others whispered prayers under their breath. But in that moment, the flight attendant had gained the upper hand. She had shifted the balance of power without creating chaos, proving the power of preparation, skill, and calm focus under pressure. The next hijacker was more alert, scanning the cabin constantly. She knew she had to be careful. A direct confrontation could trigger panic or worse, provoke a reaction that endangered lives. So she relied on strategy. She created a distraction by knocking over a tray, an ordinary accident that drew his attention for just a second. That was all she needed. She struck with precision, immobilizing him before he had any chance to retaliate. Her training had taught her that timing was everything, and she executed it perfectly. Each action was deliberate. She moved through the cabin like a shadow, appearing to serve and check on passengers while systematically reducing the threat. Her movements were fluid, almost invisible, yet each one had a purpose. She relied on her combat experience, her knowledge of tactics, and her instinctive ability to read people. The hijackers, confident just moments ago, now began to feel the first cracks in their control. By this point, the remaining hijackers started realizing something was wrong. The confidence that had filled their eyes now flickered with doubt. They noticed the calm woman moving in the cabin, the way she seemed to anticipate their moves, the way passengers seemed less terrified when she was nearby. They could not understand how one person could have so much control over a situation where they had expected fear to dominate. But she didn't give them time to recover. She began to isolate the remaining hijackers, using her understanding of human behavior. One was aggressive and reckless, another cautious and calculating. She adjusted her approach to each, knowing exactly how to exploit their weaknesses. She blocked their sight lines, subtly maneuvered passengers, and created openings for herself to act without alarming anyone. Every decision was made in seconds, yet each was perfect. Her actions were not just physical, they were psychological as well. She projected calm, confidence, and authority, which caused hesitation in the hijackers. Their aggression faltered because they were facing someone who moved with certainty, someone who had clearly been in life-and-death situations before. Their minds, clouded with the expectation of control, now struggled to comprehend that a flight attendant could be so composed and so deadly when needed. With one calculated move after another, she neutralized the threats systematically. She did not waste energy or expose herself unnecessarily. Each hijacker was dealt with in the order that made the most tactical sense, reducing their ability to regroup or retaliate. The passengers, still unaware of the full scope of her actions, felt the subtle shift in the cabin's tension. The atmosphere changed from sheer panic to cautious hope, even if no one could yet explain why. By the time she had finished with the last hijacker, the cabin was calm again. But this calm was different. It was the calm of control, of a battle won without chaos, a life-or-death situation handled perfectly. The passengers were safe, the threat neutralized, and the flight attendant's skill had turned what could have been a disaster into a controlled operation. Every movement she had made, every decision, every calculated risk had been executed flawlessly, showcasing the depth of her training and the precision of her instincts. Her eyes scanned the cabin one last time, ensuring no threat remained. Every passenger was intact, every hijacker neutralized, and the plane was under control. She had turned fear into order, chaos into calm, proving that courage, intelligence, and skill could triumph even in the most impossible circumstances. The passengers were unaware of the full story, but the truth was clear to her. She had prevented a tragedy with nothing but her mind, her instincts, and her training. In that moment, she was no longer just a flight attendant. She was a warrior, a strategist, and a protector, demonstrating that true heroism often comes from the most unexpected places. Her calm, calculated, and decisive actions had saved lives, turning what could have been a nightmare into a story of courage and skill that no one would ever forget. Even though 2 of the hijackers had already been neutralized, the remaining ones were still a serious threat. They were trained, determined, and armed, and the flight attendant knew she had to be extremely careful. She was outnumbered, yes, but that didn't scare her. Years of military experience had taught her that skill, strategy, and calmness could overcome numbers. She had faced situations before where the odds were against her, and she had survived. This was no different. The hijackers, sensing their companions had been stopped, were now on high alert. Their confidence had begun to crack, and a hint of fear had entered their eyes. They were aggressive, trying to reassert control, shouting louder and waving their weapons more violently. But the flight attendant remained composed, moving like a shadow through the cabin, keeping her presence calm yet commanding. She was watching their every movement, studying their behavior, and predicting their next steps. Passengers were terrified, clutching each other and holding their breath at every sound. Some had tears in their eyes, some were praying silently, and others were frozen, unsure what to do. But the flight attendant was the calm center of the storm. She knew that if she remained steady, the passengers could find safety in her composure. She wasn't just neutralizing hijackers physically. She was also stabilizing the entire cabin psychologically. Her mind worked quickly. She noticed small weaknesses in the remaining hijackers. One of them was impatient and reckless, raising his voice and gesturing wildly, while the other was tense and cautious, analyzing the situation before making any move. She adapted her approach to each of them. She moved closer to the reckless one, using subtle distractions and positioning herself to minimize risk to passengers while maximizing control. To the cautious one, she projected confidence and calm, making him hesitate, unsure how to act. The confined space of the plane, which could have been a disadvantage, became her tactical advantage. She used the aisles, seats, and overhead compartments to block the hijackers' line of sight, create barriers, and control movement. Every object in the cabin became part of her plan, every step and gesture measured. She could move quickly between threats without alarming anyone, maintaining the illusion of a regular flight attendant while executing a carefully calculated strategy. The hijackers, realizing they were losing control, began to make mistakes. The reckless one lunged too quickly, trying to intimidate passengers, while the cautious one hesitated, unsure of the situation. The flight attendant seized these moments. She was precise, efficient, and silent. Her strikes were calculated, aimed at disabling the hijackers without harming innocent passengers. Each action was executed with confidence, and every decision was made in seconds, balancing risk and reward perfectly. As the remaining hijackers realized that they were being overpowered by someone they underestimated, panic began to set in. They had assumed this was an ordinary flight, and they were prepared to dominate passengers and crew. But they had misjudged the woman in the uniform, not knowing that beneath her calm exterior lay years of combat training, experience in high-pressure situations, and a record of deadly efficiency. Her presence alone was enough to destabilize them mentally, causing hesitation and doubt. She continued to move strategically, isolating each hijacker, using misdirection and subtle gestures to manipulate their movements. She guided passengers out of harm's way without alarming the hijackers, whispering instructions under the guise of checking on their comfort. Every decision was tactical. She had to ensure that each hijacker could be neutralized without creating panic, without allowing them to regroup or cause harm. Her focus was absolute. Her training in the military had taught her that fear could be used against opponents. She projected calm confidence, even in the face of danger, making the hijackers second-guess their own actions. The reckless one became overconfident, assuming he could intimidate her, while the cautious one hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. The flight attendant exploited these mental cracks to gain the upper hand, controlling the battlefield silently yet completely. The passengers, though unaware of the full extent of her actions, began to feel a subtle shift in the cabin. The tension was still present, but there was now a glimmer of hope. They sensed her calm authority, though they could not yet comprehend the full extent of her skill. She was their unseen protector, a silent guardian working tirelessly to regain complete control of the flight. As the hijackers continued to falter, she moved decisively. Every move was calculated to minimize risk to others while neutralizing the threat. She isolated the reckless hijacker first, then turned her attention to the cautious one. Her strategy was clear: one at a time, systematically, efficiently, and without unnecessary force. She had learned in her past missions that patience and precision were far more powerful than brute strength, and she applied that lesson perfectly. By the time the last hijacker realized what was happening, it was too late. She had already taken control of the situation, turning the outnumbered odds in her favor. Her training, composure, and tactical genius had allowed her to face multiple armed threats, protecting every passenger in the process. The cabin, once filled with panic, had transformed into a controlled environment under her silent command. In that moment, she was no longer just a flight attendant. She was a warrior, a strategist, and a hero in disguise. Her ability to remain calm, think clearly, and act decisively under pressure had turned a life-threatening situation into a story of courage, skill, and survival. Every passenger owed their safety to her, though they would only fully understand it later. The remaining hijackers had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and neutralized, proving that courage, intelligence, and training could triumph even against overwhelming odds. The remaining hijackers were on edge. Their confidence, which had once made them feel in control, was now replaced with fear and confusion. They had expected to dominate the passengers and crew easily, but the calm, seemingly ordinary flight attendant had already turned the tables. She moved with a quiet authority, her every gesture purposeful, her eyes scanning the cabin for threats and opportunities alike. They could sense something was wrong, but they didn't understand how one woman could control the situation so effortlessly. She had learned long ago that confidence could be as deadly as skill. Projecting calm and control, she forced the hijackers to hesitate. The reckless one was twitchy, unsure of when she might act, while the cautious one was frozen, trying to calculate his next move. The psychological edge was hers. She didn't need to shout or threaten. Her presence alone was enough to unnerve them. Every subtle shift in her posture, every glance she gave, made them second-guess their actions. The fear in their eyes told her she had already begun to dominate the situation. Her mind was a flurry of calculations, considering every possibility, predicting their reactions, and preparing her next moves. She knew that patience was crucial. One wrong move could put passengers in danger. But she also knew that hesitation on her part could give the hijackers time to regroup. Timing, as always, was everything. She needed to strike with precision, and she needed to do it when the opportunity was perfect. She started with the reckless hijacker. He was aggressive but predictable. His impatience and overconfidence were weaknesses she could exploit. Using the narrow aisle of the plane to her advantage, she maneuvered him subtly into a corner, away from passengers. She used her body language and small distractions, like dropping a bag or adjusting her position, to control his movements without raising suspicion. Her military training taught her that the environment itself could be a weapon, and she used every inch of the cabin strategically. With a swift, controlled movement, she neutralized him. The action was precise and silent, leaving no room for panic among the passengers. They didn't see it, but they felt the tension in the cabin ease slightly. Her calm had spread like a ripple, reassuring passengers without them realizing why. She had shifted the balance of power entirely, turning fear into control with minimal movement but maximum effect. Now only the cautious hijacker remained. He was more alert, constantly scanning the cabin, trying to anticipate her moves. She knew she couldn't rely on brute force alone. Instead, she needed to outthink him to predict his actions before he acted. She moved slowly, deliberately, keeping him guessing. Every step, every glance, every small gesture was part of a mental game, a battle of wits as much as a physical confrontation. She began to psychologically pressure him, projecting absolute confidence while subtly limiting his options. He started to hesitate, unsure of when or how to strike. Every moment he paused was an opportunity for her to maneuver into a better position. She guided him toward a section of the cabin where passengers were safely out of harm's way, using the space strategically to control the confrontation. Her movements were smooth, precise, and deliberate, making her seem calm and ordinary while executing a complex tactical operation. The hijacker tried to act, but she anticipated his moves, reacting instantly with trained precision. She neutralized him efficiently, making sure he was incapacitated without putting any passengers at risk. It was a perfect combination of timing, skill, and strategy, learned through years of combat missions where mistakes could mean death. For a moment, the cabin was still. The chaos of fear had been replaced by controlled calm, the passengers finally able to breathe again. With the hijackers neutralized, she quickly surveyed the cabin. Everyone was safe. The passengers, still shaken, were unharmed. Some had tears in their eyes, some whispered thanks, and some stared in disbelief at the calm woman who had saved them. No one could believe that the flight attendant they had seen serving coffee and snacks moments ago was the same person who had just taken control of the entire situation with incredible skill and courage. She communicated briefly with the cockpit crew, ensuring the plane was fully secure. The pilots were amazed at the efficiency and control with which she had handled the hijackers. They realized that without her presence, the situation could have turned deadly in seconds. Her quick thinking, precise actions, and ability to remain calm under unimaginable pressure had saved countless lives. In that tense, quiet aftermath, the passengers began to understand the gravity of what had just happened. The ordinary flight had transformed into a life-or-death scenario, and the hero had been hiding in plain sight all along. The woman in uniform, smiling politely and moving gracefully down the aisle, had demonstrated not only courage but brilliance under pressure. She had turned fear into strategy, chaos into order, and had done it all without endangering a single innocent life. As the plane continued on its path, now calm and under control, her thoughts turned inward. She reflected on the importance of preparation, focus, and discipline. Every year of training, every mission, and every life-or-death encounter had prepared her for this moment. She had proven, once again, that true strength is not just in physical power but in intelligence, patience, and the ability to remain composed when everything seems lost. By the time the plane approached its destination, the passengers had regained a sense of safety, though they remained awed and shaken. They would later tell stories of the flight attendant who had acted like a guardian angel, a figure who had saved lives with a calm mind and decisive action. For her, there was no time for pride. She remained composed, professional, and focused, ensuring that the final landing would be safe. The heroism of the flight was complete, a silent testament to courage, skill, and the power of a calm mind in the face of danger. The plane was finally calm. The hijackers had been neutralized, the passengers were safe, and the cabin, once filled with panic and fear, now seemed almost peaceful. But the silence wasn't just ordinary. It carried the weight of what had just happened. Passengers looked around in disbelief, trying to process the events that had unfolded in the past tense moments. No one had expected that their flight, which had begun as an ordinary journey through the clouds, would turn into a test of courage, skill, and survival. The flight attendant moved through the cabin with quiet grace, checking on passengers and reassuring them with her calm presence. She had saved lives, but she didn't boast. She didn't shout. She didn't draw attention to herself. For her, the mission was complete once everyone was safe. The passengers, still shaken, stared at her with a mix of awe and confusion. They could sense that this was no ordinary woman. The calm smile, the confident posture, the unshakable composure. It all suggested someone extraordinary. As she helped passengers regain their composure, her thoughts were already shifting toward the next step, ensuring the plane landed safely. She communicated quietly with the pilots, confirming that the cockpit was secure and that the hijackers were fully incapacitated. Every detail mattered. She had neutralized the threat, but she had to make sure there was no risk of sudden retaliation or accidents during landing. Her military training had taught her to anticipate every scenario, and now, even after the chaos, she remained vigilant. Passengers slowly began to speak, whispering to one another about what they had seen, or what they had only sensed. Some had noticed her calmness, some had felt reassured simply by her presence, and others had witnessed moments of her skill without realizing the full extent. Slowly, the realization started to sink in. This woman, who had served them coffee and smiled politely, had saved them from a deadly threat. The sheer magnitude of her actions began to dawn on them. Their fear transformed into gratitude, and/or replaced panic. Authorities and the pilots were amazed. They had never encountered a situation where a flight attendant, in plain sight, had managed to control multiple armed hijackers, protect passengers, and neutralize threats efficiently without causing chaos. Her identity as a highly trained combat pilot was revealed quietly to the crew and officials. The story behind the calm, composed woman was staggering. She had a history of military service, experience in life and death missions, and a confirmed kill tally from previous operations. What seemed like an ordinary flight had been handled by someone with extraordinary skill and courage. News of the incident spread quickly once the plane landed safely. Media outlets highlighted the story, calling it a remarkable display of heroism and bravery. Passengers recounted the events, explaining how the flight attendant had remained calm and in control even when armed hijackers threatened their lives. Her actions were a perfect combination of intelligence, skill, and courage. People could not stop talking about how a single person had managed to protect everyone aboard a commercial flight, turning fear into safety with precision and grace. Despite the media attention and growing admiration, she remained humble. She didn't seek praise or recognition. Her focus had always been on protecting lives, completing the mission, and maintaining calm. She had spent years in situations far more dangerous than this one, and for her, doing the right thing quietly was more important than fame. Yet, the world could not ignore the extraordinary bravery she had demonstrated. Her story inspired awe, respect, and a sense of gratitude from everyone who learned about it. The passengers, who had been terrified just hours before, now felt a deep appreciation for the quiet, composed woman who had guided them through the nightmare. Mothers hugged their children tighter, elderly passengers smiled with relief, and young adults whispered thanks with tears in their eyes. Even though they hadn't fully understood the danger at the time, they now realized that their lives had been in the hands of someone incredibly capable. Her composure and skill had turned a terrifying situation into a story of hope and survival. She also reflected on the events herself, understanding that her training, discipline, and experience had been the key to managing the crisis. She had remained calm under extreme pressure, observed the hijackers, and acted decisively when it mattered most. Every calculated move, every subtle distraction, every precise action had been the difference between life and death. She knew that courage wasn't about showing off. It was about keeping control, protecting others, and acting with clarity when chaos threatened to overwhelm. As the plane touched down safely at the destination, the relief in the cabin was palpable. The passengers were safe, the hijackers were in custody, and the mission was complete. The flight attendant had fulfilled her duty flawlessly, demonstrating the power of preparation, focus, and calm under pressure. Her actions were a testament to the strength of training, the importance of discipline, and the courage required to confront danger without hesitation. In the end, the story became legendary, not just because of the danger or the heroics, but because of the hidden identity of the person who had saved everyone. A flight attendant, seemingly ordinary, had proven that extraordinary courage can hide in plain sight. Her heroism, skill, and composure under unimaginable pressure turned what could have been a tragedy into a story of survival, bravery, and inspiration that would be remembered by passengers, crew, and the world for years to come.